Hey, what's up? My name's J.M. Chaley and welcome to my channel. This week I'm going to do a tag. What's a tag? For those of you who don't know, a tag is when you are given a list of questions where you talk about a particular topic in writing or reading or something like that. Author tubers do them a lot, and it's usually a series of 10 questions or so. And they'll say, hey, answer these 10 questions on this particular topic of writing. And then they tag a bunch of other fellow author tubers or friends or booktubers, whoever, and say, hey, I want you to do this one too and answer these 10 questions about whatever subject it is. So I've been tagged. So I'm going to do this tag. And the name of this tag is This Is My Book. And I thought, what great timing for me to have been tagged for this video, because I have a book that's out today. And it's called The Vampires of 1863. Perfect. I couldn't think of a more better time to talk about this book than right now. I've been talking about this book for months and months as it is. And now this book tag comes along. It's serendipitous, to say the least. So let's get into it. I don't have the questions memorized, but I do have them written down. And I have the questions in the description if you want to grab them for later, do your own video, follow along, whatever. Question 1, what is the title of your book? The title of my book is The Vampires of 1863. Why? Because there's vampires in it, and it takes place in the 19th century. Particularly the year 1863. So, there you go. What is the genre? The genre is urban fantasy, but it's sort of historical urban fantasy. Not sort of, it is. It takes place in the 19th century in Boston, but it's still urban fantasy because it's, it's in the city. It's vampires and fae and all this kind of craziness in urban setting. What inspired you to write it? That is a good question. I think my inspiration to write this came because I had already written The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, and I wanted to get into sort of her history. I had revealed some stuff about her backstory in The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, and that really got me thinking about how those events went down. Like, what happened specifically? How do they unfold? And I thought, wow, I really want to delve into that. There's a story there. And that's kind of where my fuel came from to write The Vampires of 1863. So much so that I started working on that project before I started working on book 2 of The Unlife of Lisa Cooper. I was that excited about it. I just had to tell this story. And for that story, it was 3 years after she'd been turned into a vampire. I didn't want to get into the origin of her turning into a vampire on page. I'm not sure that's a particularly happy story at any point. So I wanted to kind of pick up where she had already been a vampire for a few years and get into that sort of origin that I had alluded to in The Unlife of Lisa Cooper. Is your book self-published or traditionally published? It is self-published. What do you love about your book? Lisa. Well, Siobhan. So her name is Siobhan McQueenie. We know her as Lisa Cooper in modern times. When you're that old, you sort of have to reinvent and create new identities and stuff like that. So Lisa Cooper is really an alias of Siobhan McQueenie's. But what I love about the book is her, the character, her development, being able to show her roots, where her convictions came from when she started looking around as a young vampire and seeing older vampires and think, oh, that's never going to be me. And digging in her heels in the very beginning. I liked being able to show that. I also liked showing her as this flawed vampire. When I wrote The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, she'd been a vampire for about 160 years. And she was pretty good at staving off her curse and controlling those dark temptations. But in the Vampires of 1863, Siobhan's not that good at it. These things are all new to her. And she hasn't built up her strength as well. So being able to show her stumble and really struggle with that curse, even more so, was very powerful. And I was able to take Siobhan to places that I wasn't able to take her in the in the Unlife of Lisa Cooper. So that was also very, very strong. And just being able to show her history, you know, and not just her history, but really what life was like for, you know, a small sampling of what life was like for the Irish living in the North End of Boston in the 1800s, showing her family, her biological family, her parents, her brother and her sisters, you know, just showing all that background on the page was a lot of fun and really great. So yeah, there's a lot that I love about this story. It was really just it felt like a love letter to this character, to be able to flesh her out that way and give her this story as an origin. What other books does yours resemble? That's a good question. You know, sometimes I compare Lisa a little bit to Louis from Interview with the Vampire because of his humanity. And I think that maybe it resembles that a little bit, especially where in The Vampires of 1863, we're getting into a historical aspect of it, right? We start with Louis, I want to say, is it the 1700s or 1800s when he's turned to a vampire? But it's in Louisiana, right? And so there's a historical element to that. He's very humane. He doesn't want his curse to overwhelm him, and he doesn't really want to hurt people. So all those kind of elements are there, and it's sort of his clawing his way up the ranks and getting into vampire society on his own. When he's got these characters like Lestat, these European vampires, you know, being a pain in his neck and everything. And so, yeah, I think maybe Interview with the Vampire might be the closest thing where you know, because of the historical aspect and the humanity angle for a vampire character. What is the scene or event you were most excited for readers to read? Well, there's on the front cover, there's obviously a fight scene. And that scene is in the book. So I'm excited for that fight scene to be read. There's going to be some reveals. I don't want to give spoilers away, but there's going to be some reveals, and I'm excited for that scene. There's a rescue scene that I really enjoyed writing. Boy, oh boy. There's a scene, and this is going to sound so sadistic, but it's her breaking point, and she really crashes hard. And that was a tough scene to write. I actually had to get up from my chair and walk away for a little while after I wrote it. And I think when you read it, it's going to have that impact as well. And I guess I'm looking forward to that scene being read because it's so potent and powerful. And it really shakes her foundations. So, yeah, there's a lot of like prominent scenes that I'm really looking forward to people reading. And the climax, you know, the big ending. Yeah, there's a lot. No, there's 2 rescue scenes. Oh, I keep thinking of more. There's 2 big rescue scenes. Yeah, the hits keep coming. I'm looking forward to all of it. What is one thing readers may have missed or not picked up when reading your book? So there is something very subtle that I put in this book that you may not pick up. If you've read The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, now you don't need to read that book to read this. They're both standalone books. Absolutely. But if you have read The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, and you know a certain detail about her creator's backstory, right? Siobhan McQueenie was turned to a vampire by another vampire named William Donovan. So if you know a certain detail about William Donovan, that is hinted at in The Vampires of 1863. That's really all I could say without giving anything away. But yeah, there's something there that's very subtle, and you may miss it if you don't know the backstory. How much, if any, research went into your book / series? A lot. So I'm writing about Boston in the year 1863. What was going on in the city, what things were like. I had to research, I looked at old maps of Boston from the 1860s, because Boston is a peninsula surrounded by the harbor, and the Charles River comes around, and to get more land, they grew Boston with landfill. And the whole Back Bay area of Boston, where there's a train station now and all these buildings, it's skyscrapers, there's cities, it was all water. 100 years ago, however long it was all water. Maybe not 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago or so. It was all water. So I had to look, there were scenes where Siobhan's walking along the street, and there's, the harbor. And I'm like, well, what street would that be? Because, right now, that street is this street over here. But back then, the street was here. Which street was that? I had to research the names of bridges, because there was one scene where she went across a bridge to get to Charlestown, which is another part of Boston. And I needed to know which bridge she would take. And all the bridges that exist now did not exist in the year 1863. So I had to find old maps and find the names of the bridges that existed back then. I had to figure out how transportation worked in the city, liveries and things like that. Dress, how people dressed back then. What Lisa's clothing, and I'm calling her Lisa, but what Siobhan's clothing looked like. She wore a bustle. How does a woman sit in a bustle? I watched a video just where a woman sat down in a bustle, and she's like, you do this, you scoot backwards, and right. A lot of research is the short answer, but yeah, a lot of research went into this book. Was your story set in or inspired by a place or places you loved or visited? Yeah, Boston. I live in Massachusetts, and our capital is Boston. I love the city. It's always a good time when you go in there. There's plenty of stuff to do, lots of history. So yeah, absolutely. It was inspired by a place I love, Boston. What in your book comes from writing what you know? Again, Boston. Siobhan McQueenie is an Irish immigrant. I'm also Irish. McQueenie happens to be the surname of my great-grandparents. So that's kind of taken from there. And, they lived on the North End, or at least their parents probably did. And they lived in and around Boston, later generations. So, yes, that's from writing what I know, that comes from my own family. And the things that happened for them when they left Ireland during the Great Hunger, as Siobhan's family did. So I kind of paralleled her story with what I assume was the story of my own ancestors when they left Ireland. The only difference is my family, they went to Scotland first, and then they came to the U.S. But other than that, it's a parallel story to to my own families without the vampires, less vampires. What did you learn from other authors that you were able to incorporate into your own book? I think one of the things that certainly helped me was pacing. So, especially during fight scenes. I always enjoy writing fight scenes, and sometimes a fight scene should be shown as this dashing, swashbuckling thing, you know, sweeping action and all this stuff. And sometimes you just need a beatdown. You just need to get to the point. I'll give an example. I was reading, and I'm going to forget who wrote this book, and I apologize. But it was a Ravenloft book from Dungeons and Dragons novel, and it came out in the 80s, I want to say, and it was about Lord Soth, who was a Death Knight from Dragonlance lore, okay? And he wound up in the realm of Ravenloft. It's a whole thing. But basically what happened was he ran across this villager, this Death Knight, who's this undead knight, right? Master swordsman, hundreds of years old, whatever. And he came across this villager, and he's, moving against this village like he's going to attack them for some reason. I forget what he was trying to do. But this young man was going to defend his village, and the author didn't even bother to write the fight. He didn't even describe the fight. He just described the boy charging in, and then the next thing you know, Lord Soth is wiping off his blade and stepping over his body. That conveyed so much more threat of what this guy was like than if he had just done whack, whack, stab, and described this quick battle. It just showed that this kid was so insignificant to someone as powerful as Lord Soth that it wasn't even worth describing on the page. And that came through. It was so visceral. Like, that stuck with me since the 80s when I read this book originally. And sometimes a fight scene needs to be that. And there is a scene in this book where the action is sort of described as quickly, I'll say, summarized in the brutality of it is so absolute that it's summarized quickly. And I think that sort of, the license to do that was given to me by that book, the Soth book in Ravenloft. So that about wraps it up. That's 12 questions. This is my book tag. Now this is the part of the video where I'm supposed to tag other authors to do this tag. Most of the people I know have already done this tag. So I don't know who to tag. I'm going to tag SD Houston. I don't know that she's done this tag before. She does a lot of live streams, but I don't know if she's done this tag. So I'm going to tag SD Houston, writer of the Clash of Goddesses series and Curse of Scales and Feathers recently. Is her recent book. So let's see her take on this, if she's watching. SD Houston. All right, that about wraps it up. If you liked this video, if you enjoyed it, if you're excited about The Vampires of 1863, please go get your copy. This book is going to be all the thrills, all the feels. Oh my God. To have taken Siobhan on this journey. Holy moly. Yeah. So if you liked it, if you're excited about it, smush that like button. And as always, please subscribe. I post most Thursdays. You can follow me on social media. I'm all over the place. Check the description for all the links. I'm very active on Facebook, Threads, and Blue Sky these days. You can sign up for my newsletter. Get a free short story when you do. And yes, Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.